The massive airplane was falling from the sky. 418 people were seconds away from death. 2 experienced pilots had lost all hope. Then a small voice behind them said, "I know how to fix this." They turned around and saw a 12-year-old girl standing in their cockpit. What happened next changed everything. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Flight 441 was a regular overnight flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo. The huge Airbus A380 aircraft carried 418 people, 410 passengers and 8 crew members. It was a calm Tuesday night. Most passengers were sleeping. Some watched movies. Others read books. Nobody knew that in just a few minutes, their lives would change forever. In the cockpit, Captain James Mitchell and First Officer Lisa Park were doing their job perfectly. They had flown this route many times before. Captain Mitchell had been flying planes for 28 years. Lisa Park had 12 years of experience. They were professionals. They knew what they were doing. The plane was flying smoothly at 37,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed safe. Then the first warning light appeared. Captain Mitchell saw a yellow light flash on the control panel. "Hydraulic system showing a problem," he said calmly. His hand moved to check the readings. Lisa looked at her screen. Her fingers moved quickly across the buttons to check what was wrong. Then another warning light turned on. Then another one. Then 5 more lights. Within 30 seconds, the quiet cockpit became filled with loud alarms. Warning lights were flashing everywhere. Both pilots tried desperately to understand what was happening to their aircraft. "Hydraulic system 1 is failing," Lisa called out. Her voice was tight with worry. "Hydraulic system 2 is losing pressure. This doesn't make sense. 3 separate systems should not fail at the same time." Captain Mitchell pressed the button to talk to the head flight attendant. "Karen, we have some technical problems. Tell your crew to prepare for a possible emergency." Suddenly, the aircraft turned violently to the left. Coffee cups flew across the cockpit. In the huge cabin behind them, 410 passengers screamed as they were thrown against their seat belts. The enormous plane weighing over 500 tons started rolling like a toy in the hands of an angry child. "Controls are not responding," Lisa shouted. She pulled hard on her control stick. Nothing happened. The massive aircraft kept rolling. Captain Mitchell felt sweat on his face. He realized they were facing something he had trained for but never believed would really happen: complete loss of control on the world's largest passenger airplane. "Electrical system 1 is failing," Lisa said, reading the warnings covering every screen. "Electrical system 2 is unstable. Backup power is not working. James, we are losing everything." Captain Mitchell made a decision. He pressed the button to speak to all the passengers. He tried to keep his voice calm and steady. But the 418 people listening could hear something else in his voice. They heard fear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are having multiple system failures and we are beginning an emergency descent. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for emergency landing." In the huge cabin, panic spread like fire. Parents grabbed their children. Strangers held hands. People who had not prayed in years started whispering desperate prayers. Flight attendants moved through the aisles quickly, but their faces showed the truth: this was not a normal emergency. This was something terrible. Karen Martinez was the head flight attendant. She had 18 years of experience. She had been through emergency training hundreds of times. She had faced small emergencies on previous flights. But nothing like this. The way the huge aircraft was moving, the rolling, the steep angle going down, the shaking, told her this was different. This was the nightmare that flight attendants talked about in whispers but never really believed would happen. She looked at passengers around her dealing with terror in different ways. Some sat frozen, faces pale, hands gripping the armrests with white knuckles. Others cried openly. A businessman in first class was quickly typing what looked like goodbye messages on his phone. A young mother 3 rows back held her baby son against her chest, singing softly to him even as tears ran down her face. An old couple held hands across the aisle. Their faces were peaceful, as if they had lived long lives and could face death together without fear. The aircraft kept falling. It was no longer under human control. The massive A380 was dropping through the sky. Its huge weight was turning it into a 500-ton missile aimed at the earth below. "Try the backup hydraulic procedure," Captain Mitchell ordered. Sweat was now running down his face. Lisa's hands moved fast across the controls, following the emergency checklist they had both memorized years ago. Nothing changed. The aircraft kept falling, dropping through 33,000 feet. The altitude meter was spinning down with terrible speed. "Emergency generator is deployed," Lisa reported. This was the backup generator that should have given them emergency power. "But it's not giving us enough hydraulic pressure. The problem in the electrical system is preventing proper power." Captain Mitchell tried to control the plane manually. He tried to bypass the flight computers and control the aircraft through direct mechanical connection. Even that failed. They were experiencing something that should have been impossible, a combination of failures so unlikely that it had not been fully covered in their training. In the cabin, flight attendants continued their emergency procedures. They moved through the rows, checking seat belts, securing loose items, preparing passengers for crash landing. But they all knew the truth: at the rate they were falling, at the angle they were going down, with no control being gained back, hundreds of people would die when they hit the ocean. In seat 38C, 12-year-old Emma Carter sat perfectly still. While adults around her sobbed and prayed, while grown men shook and strong women cried, Emma listened. She listened to the sounds of the aircraft. She listened to the sound of the engines. She listened to the subtle changes in the hydraulic systems that most passengers could not even hear. And she recognized something. This was not just any emergency. This was the specific cascade failure pattern her father had spent the last 6 years of his life studying. Emma's father, Captain David Carter, had died 3 years ago when the small plane he was testing crashed during a research flight. He had been one of the world's leading experts on large aircraft emergencies. He was a man who trained other pilots on how to handle impossible situations. He had created special techniques designed specifically for aircraft the size of the A380. Techniques that dealt with the huge mass, the complex systems, the physics that made flying a 500-ton aircraft completely different from flying smaller planes. David Carter had been focused on one specific scenario, what he called the cascade convergence failure, on heavy aircraft. He had discovered through his research that the A380's backup systems, while individually reliable, could create unexpected problems if multiple failures happened in a specific order. The hydraulic pumps, the electrical generators, the flight control computers, they were all designed to back each other up. But under certain rare conditions, their interaction could actually make the situation worse instead of better. The aviation industry had dismissed his concerns. His research papers had been rejected by major journals. Airlines refused to use his special procedures in their training programs. They called him an alarmist. They said he was creating fear about situations so unlikely they were not worth worrying about. Some of his colleagues said he was becoming paranoid, seeing dangers that did not really exist. But David Carter had been certain he was right. He had run thousands of computer simulations. He had tested his theories completely. He had developed step-by-step procedures for handling the cascade convergence failure. He had tried to convince anyone who would listen that this situation could happen. And when it did, normal procedures would not only fail, they would actually make the disaster happen faster. After his death, Emma had buried herself in his work. She had read every technical manual in his office. She had studied every simulation report. She had watched hours of video recordings where he explained his research. She had spent hundreds of hours on the professional flight simulator he kept in their garage, the one that cost more than most people's cars. The one that could recreate any emergency situation imaginable. She had done this partly from grief. Partly from love. And partly because she wanted to understand the work that had taken over her father's final years. Her mother had worried about her obsession. She had gently suggested that maybe Emma was spending too much time alone in the garage. Too many hours reading technical manuals meant for professional pilots. But Emma's grandmother, David's mother, had understood. Let her grieve in her own way, she had told Emma's mother. She's staying connected to him. She's honoring his memory. What none of them had understood was that Emma was not just honoring her father's memory. She was genuinely fascinated by his research. She understood it in ways that surprised even herself. The complex interactions between hydraulic systems and electrical generators. The feedback loops that could develop in flight control computers. The physics of controlling a 500-ton aircraft when multiple systems failed. It all made perfect sense to her. Her father had been an exceptional teacher. He could explain complex ideas in ways that made them clear and logical. And Emma had inherited not just his teaching, but his analytical mind. His ability to see patterns and understand systems. Now, sitting in seat 38C with 417 other people screaming around her, Emma realized with crystal clear certainty that her father's research, the research that mainstream aviation had dismissed as too radical, was the only thing that could save everyone aboard Flight 441. She recognized the pattern. The specific order of warning she had heard over the intercom. The way the aircraft was moving. The sounds of the system struggling. It all matched exactly what her father had predicted. Hydraulic cascade failure combined with electrical system problems on an A380 created a specific condition that normal emergency procedures could not fix. Her father had proven this in simulation hundreds of times. He had developed a different approach. A series of actions that seemed crazy, but which worked with the unique physics of massive aircraft instead of against them. The problem, as her father had discovered, was that standard procedures assumed each system could be recovered separately. But on the A380, when certain failures happened in a specific order, the systems became connected in unexpected ways. Trying to restore hydraulic pressure using standard procedures actually increased the load on the electrical system. This caused voltage problems that prevented the hydraulic pumps from working efficiently. This caused the flight computers to give commands that further hurt the electrical system. It was a feedback loop. And normal training taught pilots to take actions that made the loop stronger instead of breaking it. Her father's solution required doing something that seemed insane, completely shutting down all hydraulic systems at the same time. This would allow the electrical system to stabilize without the load of the hydraulic pumps. Then bringing the systems back online in a specific non-standard order that prevented the feedback loop from starting again. It violated every principle of backup systems that pilots were taught. It required 30 seconds during which the aircraft would be completely uncontrollable. It seemed like suicide. But David Carter had proven in simulation that it worked. And Emma knew with the terrible certainty that comes from true expertise that it was the only thing that would save Flight 441. Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. The flight attendant working her section, a woman named Jessica who had been kind to Emma during boarding, immediately rushed over. "Honey, you need to stay seated and keep your belt on," Jessica said, trying to keep her voice gentle despite the panic in her eyes. "I need to talk to the pilots," Emma said calmly. "I know what's wrong with the plane. I know how to fix it." Jessica's face softened with sympathy. She thought Emma was just a terrified child, panicking, making up a fantasy to deal with the horror of their situation. "Sweetheart, the pilots are doing everything they can. You need to sit down, Anne." "My father was Captain David Carter," Emma interrupted. Her voice cut through with unexpected authority. "He trained A380 pilots on emergency procedures for 10 years before he died. I've studied his research. I know you're experiencing hydraulic cascade failure with electrical problems. I know the standard procedures won't work. And I know the special sequence that will. Jessica stared at the 12-year-old girl in front of her. Something in Emma's eyes, a certainty, a knowledge that seemed impossible for a child, made her stop. She had been a flight attendant long enough to trust her instincts. And her instincts told her this was not a panicking child. This was someone who genuinely knew something important. Please, Emma said. We have maybe 4 minutes before we're too low for any recovery. 418 people will die if I don't talk to them right now. My father spent 6 years developing procedures for exactly this emergency. He proved them in simulation thousands of times. The aviation industry refused to listen to him. But he was right. And I can prove it if you let me talk to the pilots. Jessica made a decision that would haunt and amaze her for the rest of her life. She took Emma's hand and led her through the massive cabin. Past rows and rows of terrified passengers. Toward the front of the aircraft. Other flight attendants tried to stop them. They were confused about why Jessica was taking a child toward the cockpit during an emergency. But Jessica pushed forward, pulling Emma through the chaos. As they moved through the cabin, Emma saw the faces of hundreds of people who thought they were about to die. She saw a teenage boy about her age holding his little sister, whispering to her that everything would be okay, even though his face showed he did not believe it. She saw an older man praying, his prayer beads moving through his fingers. She saw a woman who looked pregnant, one hand on her belly, tears running down her face as she seemed to apologize to her unborn child. Emma felt the weight of what she was about to do. If her father's procedures did not work, she would be responsible for giving these people false hope in their final minutes. If she was wrong, if she had misunderstood something in his research, if the situation was different than what she thought, then 418 people would still die. And she would die knowing she had failed them all. But she also knew that doing nothing guaranteed their deaths. The pilots were following standard procedures, and those procedures were failing. Her father's research offered the only alternative. She had to try. When they reached the reinforced cockpit door, Jessica knocked hard. She picked up the intercom phone that connected directly to the pilots. Captain, there's a young passenger who says she has critical information about our emergency. She says her father was Captain David Carter. There was a pause. Even through the door, even over the screaming alarms and the terrified sounds of passengers, Emma could hear the shock in Captain Mitchell's voice when he responded. David Carter. The researcher. The one who worked on unconventional heavy aircraft emergency procedures. Yes, sir, Jessica said. His daughter is here. She says she knows what's wrong and how to fix it. Another pause. Emma could imagine the conversation happening in the cockpit. Two professional pilots trying to decide if they should trust the expertise of a 12-year-old child while 418 lives hung in the balance. They were dropping through 26,000 feet now. Every second of delay brought them closer to the point where no recovery would be possible. In the cockpit, Captain Mitchell and First Officer Park exchanged desperate looks. They had tried everything. Every procedure in their training. Every backup system. Every alternative approach they could think of. Nothing had worked. They were out of ideas. Out of time. Out of hope. Let her in, Captain Mitchell said finally. David Carter was brilliant. If his daughter knows something, we need to hear it. We have nothing left to lose. The door lock clicked. The heavy cockpit door opened. Emma stepped inside and saw two pilots fighting desperately with controls that were not responding. Their faces showed the terrible knowledge that they were failing. That hundreds of people were going to die. That nothing in their training had prepared them for this specific combination of failures. Talk fast, Captain Mitchell said, not taking his eyes off his useless instruments. We're at 25,000 feet and dropping at 3,500 feet per minute. Standard hydraulic failure procedures are not working. Backup systems are not engaging. We have maybe 7 minutes until we're too low to recover, even if we somehow regain control. Emma moved forward. Her eyes scanned the instrument panels with the practiced efficiency her father had trained into her. She saw exactly what she expected, the specific failure pattern her father had documented. The cascade that normal procedures could not address because they did not account for how the A380's backup systems interacted during multiple simultaneous failures. "You're following the standard hydraulic failure recovery procedure," Emma said. Her voice was steady despite her racing heart. "You're trying to isolate the failed systems and switch to backups. But on the A380, with this specific failure pattern, that approach makes the problem worse. The electrical problems are being caused by your attempts to switch systems. You're creating feedback loops in the power network." First Officer Park looked at Emma with shock. "How does a 12-year-old know about power distribution feedback loops?" "My father spent 6 years studying this exact scenario," Emma said. "He proved in simulation that normal procedures fail with this failure combination on heavy aircraft. The A380's electrical system cannot handle the switching loads when you're trying to restore multiple hydraulic systems at the same time. Every time you try to bring a backup system online, it creates a voltage spike that destabilizes the flight computers. This causes them to give wrong commands to the remaining hydraulic systems. This creates more electrical load, which makes everything worse." She pointed at one of the displays. "See that voltage pattern? That's the feedback loop. Your actions are not fixing the problem. They're making it bigger. You need to break the cycle completely before you can restore any control." Captain Mitchell shook his head. His hands still fighting uselessly with the controls. "How do we break it? We've tried everything in the manual." "You need to do something that's not in the manual," Emma said. "Something my father developed specifically for this failure pattern. You need to shut down all hydraulic pump switches at the same time. Hold them off for 30 seconds. Then bring them back up in a specific order that doesn't follow standard priority." The cockpit went silent except for the screaming alarms. Both pilots stared at Emma with expressions mixing desperation and disbelief. "That's insane," Lisa Park said finally. "Shutting down all hydraulic pumps means we'll have zero control. The aircraft will be completely uncontrollable for 30 seconds. At this rate of descent, in 30 seconds we'll drop another 1,750 feet. We're already at 23,000 feet. If we lose control completely, we might not be able to recover before we hit the ocean." "You already don't have control," Emma pointed out. Her voice was calm but urgent. "The feedback loops in your power system mean your controls are not doing anything anyway. What you need to do is reset the entire hydraulic power distribution network. 30 seconds of complete shutdown lets the electrical system stabilize without the load and the switching demands. Then bringing the pumps back up in non-standard order, pump 3 first, then 1, then 4, then 2, prevents the feedback loops from starting again. You're not overloading any single electrical bus during the restart." Captain Mitchell looked at his altitude meter. 22,000 feet and falling. 6 minutes to impact. Maybe less. He thought about the 410 passengers and 8 crew members behind him. He thought about his wife and 3 children waiting for him at home. He thought about every principle of aviation safety he had learned in 28 years of flying. And he thought about David Carter, a brilliant researcher whose unconventional ideas had been dismissed by an industry that preferred established procedures to innovative thinking. He remembered reading about Carter's death 3 years ago. He remembered thinking it was a tragedy that such a talented pilot and researcher had died before his work was fully recognized. "Lisa," he said quietly. "What do you think?" First Officer Park looked at the instrument panels. At the cascading failures that nothing in their training had prepared them to handle. At the altitude meter continuing its terrifying countdown toward zero. "I think we're dead in 6 minutes if we keep doing what we're doing," she said. "I think this 12-year-old knows more about our specific emergency than we do. And I think David Carter was probably right about everything, and the industry was wrong to dismiss his research." She looked at Emma. If we do this and it doesn't work, we'll have maybe 3 minutes before impact instead of 6. 3 minutes to say goodbye. To make peace. To prepare for the end. If we don't do this, we have 6 minutes but no hope. I'd rather have 3 minutes with a chance than 6 minutes with none. Captain Mitchell made the hardest decision of his career. He looked at the 12-year-old girl standing in his cockpit. He saw the certainty in her eyes and the intelligence in her face. He saw her father's legacy living on through her knowledge and her courage. And he chose to trust her. "Tell me exactly what to do," he said. Emma moved closer to the center console. Her heart was pounding but her voice stayed steady. This was what her father had trained her for, even though neither of them had known it at the time. All those hours in the simulator. All those technical discussions. All those evenings spent reviewing emergency procedures. It had all been preparation for this moment. "First Officer Park, you need to override the automatic pump protection system," Emma said. "There's a guarded switch on your lower right panel. Lift the guard and move the switch to override position. That will let us shut down all pumps at the same time without the computer trying to restart them automatically." Lisa's hands moved to the panel. She found the switch. She lifted the red guard that protected it and moved it to override position. "Done. Captain Mitchell, you need to shut off all hydraulic pump switches at the same time," Emma continued. "All of them at once. Left hand on pumps 1 and 2. Right hand on pumps 3 and 4. It has to be at the same time because if you shut them down in order, the electrical system will try to compensate and you'll create new feedback loops. On my count." Captain Mitchell positioned his hands over the 4 switches. His training screamed at him that this was wrong. That shutting down all hydraulic pumps would kill them all. That he was trusting his aircraft and everyone aboard to a procedure suggested by a child who should not be in his cockpit. But he had made his decision. He would trust Emma Carter the same way he would have trusted her father. 3, 2, 1, off, Emma commanded. Captain Mitchell flipped all 4 switches at the same time. Instantly, every hydraulic pressure indicator dropped to 0. The control sticks in front of both pilots became completely loose, offering no resistance, controlling nothing. The massive A380 was now a 500-ton glider falling through the sky with absolutely no human influence on where it was going. "Jesus Christ," Lisa whispered. They were at 20,000 feet now. Dropping faster because without any control surfaces working, the aircraft was falling in whatever angle the last moments of partial control had left it in. In the cabin behind them, passengers felt the change as the descent became even steeper. Even more terrifying. People who thought they were already experiencing maximum fear discovered they were wrong. Some passengers began screaming louder. Others prayed harder. The young mother holding her baby son clutched him tighter, still singing through her tears. The old couple holding hands across the aisle closed their eyes together, accepting death. Throughout the enormous aircraft, 418 people faced their mortality. Emma watched the timer on the instrument panel, counting down the 30 seconds her father's research had determined was necessary for the electrical system to fully stabilize. She could see the voltage indicators beginning to smooth out. The wild swings were decreasing as the electrical generators no longer had to handle the impossible demands of multiple hydraulic pumps fighting against feedback loops. But 30 seconds felt like 30 hours. Captain Mitchell and First Officer Park sat helpless while their aircraft fell uncontrolled through the sky. Everything in their training told them they had just killed everyone aboard. They had given up the only control they had. And now they were simply passengers in a falling aircraft, waiting to see if a 12-year-old girl's inherited knowledge would save them or if they had just made their deaths come faster. 20 seconds. 17,000 feet. Falling at nearly 4,000 feet per minute now. The ocean was rushing up toward them in the darkness. 25 seconds. 15,000 feet. Some passengers had stopped screaming, moved beyond terror into a strange calm acceptance. 28 seconds. 13,000 feet. Emma kept her eyes on the timer and the electrical system indicators. 30 seconds. Now bring them back up, Emma said, her voice cutting through the chaos of alarms. But not in standard order. First Officer Park, activate pump 3 only. Wait 5 seconds, then activate pump 1. Lisa's hand moved to pump 3. She threw the switch. The pump began spinning up. And for the first time since the emergency began, it came online cleanly. No voltage spike. No feedback loop. The electrical system handled the load smoothly. Pump 3 is online and stable, Lisa reported. Hope crept into her voice for the first time in 12 minutes. Wait 5 seconds, Emma reminded her. The electrical system needs time to adjust to the load before you add another pump. They waited. 5 seconds felt like forever. But Emma knew her father's research had been precise. 5 seconds was how long the A380's electrical system needed to fully handle one hydraulic pump before it could handle another without creating instability. Now pump 1, Emma said. Lisa activated pump 1. Again, it came online smoothly. Hydraulic pressure began building in systems 1 and 3. Pumps 1 and 3 are online and stable, Lisa said. Her voice filled with amazement. We're getting hydraulic pressure. James, we're getting pressure. Captain Mitchell looked at his hydraulic indicators. After 12 minutes of zeros and failures, he was seeing the needles climb toward normal levels. But they were not out of danger yet. They were at 11,000 feet now. Still falling. Still uncontrolled. Captain Mitchell, wait 10 seconds after pump 1, then activate pump 4, Emma instructed. Then wait 5 more seconds and activate pump 2. They followed her sequence exactly. Pump 4 came online. Then pump 2. And slowly, miraculously, hydraulic pressure built across all systems. The electrical indicators showed stable voltage. The feedback loops that had been destroying their control were gone. Try the controls, Emma said quietly. Captain Mitchell pulled gently on his control stick. And the massive aircraft responded. After 13 minutes of complete uncontrollability, after everyone aboard had accepted they were going to die, the A380 began to level out. The terrible descent slowed. The nose began to rise. It's working, Lisa breathed. Her voice filled with disbelief. The controls are responding. We have hydraulic pressure across all systems. We have flight control. They were at 10,000 feet now. But the rate of descent was decreasing. Captain Mitchell and First Officer Park worked together. Their hands moved across controls that now responded as designed. Gradually bringing the massive aircraft back under full human control. The A380 leveled out at 8,500 feet. No longer falling, but flying straight and level. Captain Mitchell keyed the passenger address system. His hand was shaking as he picked up the microphone. This time his voice was different. Still shaking, but with overwhelming relief instead of fear. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We have regained full control of the aircraft. The emergency is over. I repeat, the emergency is over. We're going to make an emergency landing at the nearest airport, but everyone is going to be okay. Everyone is going to be okay. The sound that came from the cabin was unlike anything the pilots had ever heard. 418 people simultaneously crying, laughing, screaming with relief. Embracing strangers. Thanking God or the universe or simple luck or whatever they believed in. People who had been certain they would die in the next few minutes discovered they were going to live. Parents hugged their children. Strangers held each other. The young mother kissed her baby son's head over and over. Her tears of terror turning into tears of joy. The old couple who had been holding hands across the aisle unbuckled and hugged each other, crying together. Throughout the enormous aircraft, 418 people experienced the most intense emotional change of their lives, from acceptance of death to the gift of continued life. From terror to relief. From goodbye to hello again. In the cockpit, First Officer Park turned to look at Emma. Tears were running down her face. "You just saved 418 lives," she said. "You're 12 years old and you just saved 418 lives." "My father saved them," Emma said quietly. "I just remembered what he taught me." Captain Mitchell looked at this extraordinary child standing in his cockpit. "Your father's research, did the aviation industry really reject it?" Emma nodded. "They said his procedures were too unconventional. Too different from standard training. They said the failure scenario he was studying was too unlikely to need new procedures. They refused to publish his papers or use his techniques in pilot training." "They were wrong," Lisa said firmly. "Your father was right about everything. He understood something about heavy aircraft emergencies that the rest of the industry missed. And you just proved it by saving all of us." Captain Mitchell guided Flight 441 toward an emergency landing at Honolulu International Airport, the nearest suitable facility for an A380 emergency landing. He declared a full emergency, requesting maximum crash and rescue response. Fire trucks, ambulances, emergency response teams, dozens of vehicles raced into position along the runway, preparing for the worst. Controllers in Honolulu Tower had been following Flight 441's emergency. They had heard the desperate communications as the pilots fought to control their aircraft. They had watched the terrifying descent on radar. They had called in every emergency resource available. They had cleared all other traffic from the airport. They had prepared for what they thought would be a disaster with many deaths. But when Flight 441 touched down 50 minutes after Emma's intervention, the landing was rough but controlled. The massive aircraft rolled down the runway. Its brakes and remaining systems working well enough to bring it safely to a stop. Emergency crews surrounded the plane immediately, expecting to find casualties. Expecting to begin rescue operations for a disaster that would be in news headlines for weeks. Instead, they found 418 people who were shaken, crying, traumatized, but alive. Every single person aboard Flight 441 walked off that aircraft. Not a single serious injury. Not a single death. A complete survival of what should have been an impossible emergency. The emergency workers stood in amazement as passenger after passenger came down the evacuation slides. Many of them still crying. Many hugging the firefighters and paramedics who had expected to find bodies. The young mother came down the slide holding her baby son, kissing the ground when she reached it. The old couple walked down hand in hand, thanking everyone they saw. The teenage boy who had comforted his little sister carried her down on his back. Both of them crying with relief. And through it all, the emergency workers kept asking the same question. How? How did an aircraft experiencing complete flight control failure somehow recover? How did everyone survive? What happened aboard Flight 441? The investigation began immediately. FAA officials, airline executives, aviation safety experts came to Honolulu to understand what had happened. They pulled the flight data recorder. They interviewed the pilots. They examined every system on the damaged aircraft. And slowly, the story came out. Captain Mitchell and First Officer Park told investigators about the cascade failure. About following standard procedures that did not work. About the 12-year-old girl who walked into their cockpit with knowledge that saved everyone aboard. At first, investigators did not believe it. A child providing technical guidance that experienced pilots could not. Suggesting procedures that violated everything in standard training. It seemed impossible. "I know how it sounds," Captain Mitchell told the lead investigator. "I know it seems crazy that we followed advice from a 12-year-old. But she knew things about our emergency that we didn't know. She understood the failure pattern in ways our training never addressed. And she was right. Everything she told us to do worked exactly as she said it would." The investigator, a veteran pilot named Robert Chen who had spent 32 years analyzing aircraft accidents, shook his head in disbelief. "Captain, you shut down all hydraulic systems at the same time during an emergency descent. That's the opposite of every procedure we teach. How could you make that decision?" "Because nothing else was working," James Mitchell said simply. "We were at 22,000 feet and falling. We had maybe 6 minutes until impact. Every standard procedure had failed. Emma Carter offered us an alternative that her father had developed specifically for our failure scenario. We had nothing to lose and 418 lives to save. So we trusted her." "And if her procedures had not worked?" Robert asked. "Then we would have died 3 minutes sooner than we were going to die anyway," James said. "But we would have died knowing we tried everything possible. That we didn't just follow standard procedures to our deaths when an alternative existed." Robert Chen requested access to David Carter's research files. Emma's mother, Sarah Carter, provided investigators with boxes of her late husband's technical documents. Simulation records. Procedure development notes. She gave them access to the flight simulator in their garage. Showed them the thousands of hours of simulation data David had recorded while developing his unconventional procedures. Aviation safety experts spent 4 weeks analyzing the research. They reviewed David Carter's papers. Read his technical analysis. Studied his simulation results. They brought in electrical engineers to check his theories about power distribution feedback loops. They talked with aeronautical engineers about his understanding of heavy aircraft flight dynamics. They ran their own simulations using his procedures. And they discovered that Captain David Carter had been absolutely, completely, brilliantly correct about everything. His analysis of cascade convergence failures on the A380 was perfect. His understanding of how electrical system feedback loops could prevent hydraulic system recovery was groundbreaking. His unconventional procedures for breaking those feedback loops and restoring control were not only valid but clearly better than standard approaches in specific failure scenarios. The aviation industry had been wrong to dismiss his research. They had been wrong to reject his papers. 6 months later, the FAA made David Carter's procedures mandatory training for all A380 pilots worldwide. His name was honored with aviation safety awards. Airlines apologized for dismissing his research. Emma received medals from multiple countries. But the recognition that meant most came from the 418 survivors who gathered every year to celebrate life. At 18, Emma became a pilot. At 25, she flew her first A380, the same aircraft type her father had dedicated his life to understanding. "Your father saved us twice," Captain Mitchell told her years later. "Once through his research. And once through you having the courage to use it." Emma smiled. "He taught me that being right matters less than saving lives. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust knowledge, even when it comes from unexpected places." Today, every A380 pilot learns David Carter's procedures. His research is taught in aviation schools worldwide. And somewhere, a father's legacy lives on, not through fame, but through the thousands of lives his work continues to protect. Flight 441 proved that heroes come in all ages. That unconventional thinking can save lives. And that a 12-year-old girl with courage and knowledge can change the world.